Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Cazue. Mind, body, brute.
What's up? Welcome back. My name is Mike Cazue, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week's guest is Dr. Anthony Gustin. Anthony is the owner of a company called Perfect Keto, which sells a ton of different ketogenic supplements and is just an amazing resource in the keto world. The reason that I sought Anthony out in the first place is twofold. One, I've never done a podcast on keto, and I knew you guys would be interested in learning more about it, as was I. And I also noticed that just from looking through his Instagram and seeing some of the other podcasts that he's been on, that Anthony is a huge self-experimenter, and he's someone that's just really into self-development, and that's just one of my biggest passions in life. And so I wanted to see what we could learn from what he does that's working and what he's tried that hasn't worked. So we start off, it takes us a while to get into the whole keto topic, but the first half of the show I think is still super interesting. We talk about how he used a huge failure in his life and turned it into a positive, how he shifted from thinking that he was going to be a chiropractor for years and years and years, and really how his entire life was set up to be in that type of environment, and how he shifted to becoming an entrepreneur almost at the drop of a hat. We talk about how he reads 52 books a year and how you can retain more basically from what you read. I thought that was really interesting. We talk about how to value achievement versus fulfillment, dumb mistakes people make in their nutrition, the benefits of eating organ meats, and what the most nutrient-dense foods are in the world. That part was super interesting. And finally, we get into ketosis. So he breaks down exactly what ketosis is. And then we go on several tangents. We talk about ketosis for fat loss, for longevity, in particular, the reduction of, or the claims of the reduction in cardiovascular disease as well as cancer. We talk about ketosis for brain function. And what I really love about Anthony is that he has a super balanced perspective. And one thing we talk about on the show, one thing that I say is that usually when I talk to proponents of ketosis, they're very polarizing in that they think everyone should be on ketosis. It's the be all end all, and it's the only way to eat as healthy as possible. And Anthony has a much different approach. He thinks that ketosis is a great tool for certain people, and for certain people it's probably not the best approach, which is the first time I've ever heard someone, a big proponent of ketosis, take that kind of stance. So he goes into detail about who it's good for, who it's not, and then gives some recommendations for, if you want to try it out, exactly how you can go about it, the best resources to use, etc. So I learned a ton on this one. Anthony is a kick-ass dude and just a super knowledgeable guy. So I know you're going to enjoy this show. A couple other things before we get the show started. If you haven't done so already, please head to iTunes, leave me a quick review, share this podcast with a friend, because sharing is caring. And last but not least, if you want to know what our 5 most downloaded shows are and get some big tips from each, you can get some free access to a PDF that we put together exactly for that. It's a document that has the 5 most downloaded shows with practical tips and strategies that you can implement into your life and your training. And you can get access to that at brutestrengthtraining.com/top5. Enjoy the show. What's up, guys? I'm here with Dr. Anthony Gustin. Anthony, it's good to finally meet you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me over, man. Appreciate it.
You are a man with many hats, a man that wears many hats.
Too many.
You're the co-founder of Perfect Keto, Equip. You're a chiropractor. Did I leave anything out?
We'll just leave it at that to keep it simple, but yeah.
Awesome, man.
easy to get distracted.
Yeah, you've got a lot going on. Let's start with the real important stuff. Fuck one, kill one, marry one.
Ooh.
Greg Glassman, Dave Asprey, Rob Wolf.
What do I start with here?
You take it where you want. You got to fuck one, you got to kill one, you got to marry one.
I will marry Rob. He's a great dude. I think that he'd be a good long-term partner. He's nice and he's hilarious. So I love that. And I think that if it's between fucking and killing, I don't think I can choose fucking Greg Glassman. So we'll pick Dave Asprey on that one and put him to the kill, but not for like a reason like I'm not anti-CrossFit, which I can see that getting out of hand real quickly.
Yeah.
So that's not the reason. It's just I'm not physically attracted to him.
You're just physically attracted to Dave Asprey,
right?
As am I.
That's the main reason.
So you're a big self-experimenter. It looks like you've done a million different diets, as have I. What's the craziest diet you've ever been on?
Yeah. So do you know the website T Nation?
Of course, dude. That is how I learned how to coach.
Yeah. So they had a velocity diet. I don't know if you know about this one. Whereas
I've heard of it.
Yeah, you just drink their protein shakes for 28 days.
Okay.
And so I did that.
Nothing but them?
Yeah. I did that for a week. And it was disgusting. It was just basically like 100 grams of shitty whey protein per day. That was probably the craziest thing I've ever done. It was.
What was your digestion like?
It was nothing. I mean, all the protein just gets digested in your small intestines. I mean, there was nothing there. And like so now I think that recently I just did the carnivore diet for 30 days, where it's just eating only animal products. And so I think that while not to me it's been crazy, that's probably the most crazy thing that somebody else would say that I've been doing, which has been only animal products for a significant amount of time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What inspired that?
This has just been a lot of people. I've seen a lot of anecdotes about people having a lot of success with it, from treating autoimmune conditions or certain things like when paleo and keto and things like that strategies aren't helping. A carnivore diet seems to be working for a lot of people. And so that tells me that there's something going on there, that there's a benefit to it. What is it? I don't know. That's why I was curious. So I gave it a spin to see how I liked it, and felt great. Felt actually amazing. Probably the best I've ever felt.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so now what are you doing?
So that led me to a few different hypotheses. Like, okay, why would this be the case? Like, why would something like this be beneficial for people? And I think in general, people probably get too much fiber. When I was working as a functional medicine clinician, and so I went from sports med to working with functional medicine, which is just basically using labs and getting to the root cause of what people have problems. And a lot of that was due to gut issues. And so 90+% of people who had gut problems had an overgrowth of bacteria, not an undergrowth. And so fiber feeds bacteria in your gut. And so one of my thoughts is that a carnivore diet is 0 fiber, 0 carbs. And one of the reasons why I think a ketogenic diet might be so beneficial is because it starves off the bad gut bacteria and pulls that away and helps kind of trim the hedges of the bad bacteria so that your gut can rebalance itself. So I think that's one of the reasons why people generally feel better on some of these diets. And I actually feel way better like that as well. So I tested my gut and I actually had a certain overgrowth of bacteria. I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And so I think that until I get that under control, I'm going to keep doing somewhat similar, but eating plants in a certain amount. So that's when we say, like, okay, a carnivore diet was obviously good for some people, but that's not to say like vegetables are bad for everybody. Obviously, no one would say that, but like they're good for a reason as well. And so it's like, how do you get best of both worlds? And so I think eating a lot of low fiber, high nutrient dense vegetables to get some of those micronutrients and some of that plant matter in would be a good idea. So that's kind of like where I'm at right now. So like, for instance,
That's so interesting.
Like 80% animal products, I think 20% low fiber, like leafy greens. Like I had this morning I had eggs, bacon, an avocado, and cilantro microgreens. So like a bunch of like tiny little sprouts essentially, which are super high in phytonutrients, but very low in fiber. Basically anything that you can like throw in a pot, and it's like, you know, when you put like 8 bags of spinach into a pot and it comes out with like 1 spoonful, like that's just low fiber. Like, so you're getting all of that plant matter, but you're just getting it because it's very low fiber. So that's kind of where I've been skewing to now.
Gotcha. It's interesting because I feel like we've seen almost the opposite. What population are you speaking about, or is it just like that's what you saw in general population?
Yeah. So I mean, people who would be sick, I suppose, like people coming in and complaining about things. Like a lot of times people, like, let's say they have a skin problem, it actually is a gut problem because their gut's messed up, and that reflects in the skin. Joint problems, autoimmune conditions, obviously gut problems and digestive problems and stuff like that. So the population I dealt with obviously was very different than by general population.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of people that are gravitating towards this stuff are using it as a tool to treat some type of condition because it's so extreme. Like people aren't going to just generally be like, oh, I'm going to lose some weight, I'm going to eat all animal products. And so people want to use it as a tool to solve something that's very serious to them. And so that's why I think that those people are self-selecting themselves into a certain population.
Right. Excuse me. I would think especially people in low SES demographics or areas would have super low fiber, right? Because they're not low SES, socioeconomic status.
Okay.
So like they're not eating a lot. They're typically not eating a ton of vegetables. So definitely not high fiber vegetables. Where else might they be getting the fiber? Maybe I just don't know.
Yeah, like any type of wheat products.
Okay.
It's like people eat like, okay, they're not eating vegetables, but they're eating donuts or hamburger buns or whatever, or processed food in general.
They're definitely getting their fiber then.
Yeah, for sure. And like I think that they're eating a very inflammatory diet, so like that causes gut problems as well, just as much as eating like a lot of fiber would cause overgrowth of some bacteria. And processed food, so like let's say you have high sugar amount but low fiber, that's going to be worse than high fiber, for example, because then more sugar means that bugs that are higher up in your digestive system can thrive and grow in your small intestine where they shouldn't be. And so, I mean, what causes overgrowth of bacteria is like a completely loaded question because there's so many different factors that can contribute to it. And so it's kind of this thing where it doesn't really matter at the point of like the incidence of overgrowth of bacteria, whether it's from an inflammatory diet, from being super stressed out, which I think was my case. I mean, I was traveling for like, I think 14 months straight. I hadn't been anywhere like for longer than a week and a half. And like companies blowing up, like all this crazy stuff, like good things, but like super stressful environment. Like not sleeping that well, like moving to a new city. There's a lot of stuff that like probably led to my incidence of that. And I think that people eating inflammatory foods or eating not the right foods for them, I mean, or overtraining, like a lot of these things can lead to these problems. So I don't think that's even like a relevant question of like, how did they get there? More so like, is that incidence throughout the general population higher than lower? I would say yeah. Whereas people like generally think that they need more fiber and that probiotics are good and all this different stuff. I think that that's kind of the area of misinformation for most people.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What's a failure you've had in your life that ended up maybe changing your life in a positive way or just really having a positive impact on you?
Yeah, so the first website I ever launched was the Paleo Fix. It's all about the paleo diet.
Okay.
And I thought I was going to be like this internet star. And I put my first article out there.
It sounds great.
Yeah, and there was like 15 trolls that said I sucked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like this huge point.
What year was this again?
This was 2010 maybe.
Oh man, that was a good time too.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. Yeah, 2013. Sorry, 2010 was too early. So 2013, I was putting these articles out there. It was the first time like I exposed myself to the internet. You know, and I think that took a lot of courage to get over the trolls harassing you. Be like, anybody can have a bad opinion and be criticizing you, and so like I let it emotionally affect me pretty hard in the beginning, and then like I didn't post anything for forever, and like I didn't want to put anything on social media, I didn't want to put anything online, but then I was just like, you know, fuck it, I'm gonna come at it, and I'm gonna, because like originally it was for like I was treating a lot of patients and repeating myself. And I wanted to not do that ever again. And so I was writing articles for them to go read.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so getting over the criticism, I mean, I think the site just eventually turned into my name. And I'm still publishing some stuff now. But I think that learning that there's a world outside of where I was in a service-based industry of like working with people at my clinic, I think was a very small world. And so I was working with people one-on-one in San Francisco, quite a bubble. And then realizing that people had different needs, different wants worldwide, and that you can affect people on a global scale using the internet, I think was a big eye-opening thing with obviously where I am now.
Right.
Is leveraging that and doing that to make impact on people. And so I think that phase initially of like being criticized and overcoming the like troll like mentality and realizing like it doesn't matter, like you can't please everyone, especially on the internet. Like no way. I could please everybody in my clinic, but like that was a very small population. When I went online and started taking that at a more broad angle, it was tough at first, but I got over it, and I think that significantly changed my life. I mean, otherwise I'd still be a chiro.
Right. Yeah, one of the hardest pills to swallow is like, if you try to make something for everyone, you're probably not going to make anything kick ass for anyone, right?
Exactly.
You'll make something kind of good for a lot of people, but you really have to be polarizing in a way in your thoughts and your words to build something amazing and really build a community and a tribe.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about this story. You went from, and we were talking about before the show, that you spent your entire life planning to be a chiropractor in one way or another. And then pretty much on a dime, you switched and became an entrepreneur. What happened?
Yeah, so I think that the entrepreneur in me had always been there, and that's why I chose chiropractic in the first place. So I knew I wanted to do something in healthcare when I was young, as young as I could remember. And then it wasn't until I think maybe high school where we had a family friend who was an orthopedic surgeon, and he said that, look, like, you're going to be a slave to a hospital, you're going to work 80 hours a week and never see your family and be on call. It's like, this is not a life you probably want to live. Mm-hmm. It's like, you don't get to make any decisions, essentially. And so I started researching. I was like, what do I want to actually work on? And so I was thinking of working more with athletes and more in a preventative way and actually fixing people instead of just putting them back together when they're broken. And so that led me between like, okay, do I want to do like sports medicine? Do I want to do like PT? Do I want to do chiropractic? And is the best profession that has the broadest scope where everyone is a business owner. So like there's almost no chiropractors that are employed. And so you have to be a business owner and a successful one to do so. And my dad owns his own business, and so he always drilled into the thought of me of like, no matter what you do, it's okay as long as you're making the rules essentially and you're working for yourself. And so I always had that mentality. And so I went into that as like,
as
okay,
long as you're making the rules. I love that.
Right. Which is, I don't know if it's the best advice to be given a young kid who got in trouble a lot at school, but it worked out.
Right.
But yeah, it was the thing that I could do, like preventative healthcare, work with athletes, and own my own business. And so at that point, I was kind of just off to the races. And so I went through undergrad really quickly. I finished up in 3 years, and then went to grad school, and then simultaneously got my doctorate in chiropractic, and then master's in sports rehab. And then from there, moved to San Francisco, where I opened up with another guy a clinic that went from 1 to 6 locations in 3 years. So really fast growth. And the business side of me at that point too is like, I wanted to help as many people as possible. And so I was trying to figure out how we do that. And so a lot of protocols, a lot of systems. And then it came to a point where like we had 6 clinics and I was working with everybody. And I was like, okay, let's do the math. If this continues at this rate, like how many people I'm going to be impacting throughout my life. Mm-hmm. So I do like a monthly retreat where like I tear apart everything I think is good in my life and like try to re-examine everything. And I actually...
Is that still something that you do?
Oh yeah, every month, like religiously.
Okay.
And so I remember I was up in Northern California at this place where I usually went to do like 1 or 2 days of just like this self-reflection. And I did the arithmetic on like how many people I could actually help in my life doing it that way. And it was like something like 55,000 people. I was like, oh shit, like this is less than like the small hometown that I grew up in.
That's not 1 million.
Right. And so I was like, there are 7 billion people in the world, and I can only help in my life the way I'm going 50,000 people. Like something's wrong here. And so at that point, started working on like where are the problems that I think are important to address, and like how do I actually address those in an appropriate way. And so whether it's getting somebody rehabbed through sports injury, someone sprains their ankle, or having somebody who has a gut problem, like we talked about earlier, I think the key to success in either one of those people is a foundation of nutrition. And so this has always been a point for me. I was super overweight when I was younger. I was super inflamed, had all these injuries. And it wasn't until I got like my nutrition figured out where I felt finally healthy, which took a long period of time. So I thought, okay, if I shorten the time, people figure out what works for them from a nutritional standpoint, like I can have the most amount of impact. And so I was thinking about how I could be doing this. And I was working with a lot of top CrossFit athletes in the time in the San Francisco area and pro athletes. And one of the things that they were, I think, detrimental to their health they were having were like pre-workout supplements. And so the first product I launched was like a healthy pre-workout. And so something that was replacing something that was processed that people were taking that was probably really bad for them with something that was actually additive to them. And so with that, we just started a whole chain of things using products as a way to get people into a system of education about using like an individualized approach to nutrition so that they could figure out what works for them, instead of just using products to try to solve problems and patch holes.
I love it, dude. So I want to dive into some of the like research that you're uncovering and talk all keto. But one of the main reasons that I wanted to do this show in the first place is because of what I've observed about you, like as a person and like self-experimenter. One of the things that I one of the things that came across one of your feeds or something is that you read 52 books a year. And so I consider myself, I think I read more than most people I know, and I probably read half that, and I still have trouble retaining a lot of it. How do you retain what you read?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I talked about my monthly routine where I look through and reassess about everything that's going on. I have a really ridiculous spreadsheet where, anybody who knows me be listening to this probably laughing out loud right now, but there are tabs for different years where I have all the goals of different areas of my life that I want to like achieve in that year. And so then I track those month over month, and I have like a daily and monthly tracker where I break that down and like what I need to do on a daily basis to get those things done.
Mm-hmm.
And then like all my books that I'm reading and like why I'm reading them. But in those columns of books, I have, did I review it? Yes or no? And so I put all the ones I'm reading, and then did I review it? Yes or no? And so when I go through and I get through maybe like 20, 30 books, I start then going back and reviewing the ones I had read. If they are nonfiction, obviously, like I don't review fiction books. I only read maybe 10% of my books are fiction though. Mm-hmm. But I go through and then have an Evernote document where I take notes on the book. And then the year after, I read all my notes on the books.
Cool.
Right. And so it's like this triple layered thing where like I read the book first, take notes, just highlight in a Kindle. Mm-hmm. Just use a Kindle app or like an actual Kindle. And then later on through this tracking sheet, I can say like which ones did I review, and then which ones did I reread. And so that way I don't have to like read the same book again to get the same information. And sometimes it's like, oh, I remember this concept. I should maybe like learn, like look into this again. I can go into my notes and look through, and then even with my Kindle app, just go through and like flip through about that passage and read that thing that was important to me that I thought was meaningful. And there are sometimes where I just reread books over and over and over again. But yeah, I still obviously don't retain everything, but I think that some of the stuff with reading books is like trying to retain everything isn't really the point. I think that's like reading it and consuming the information probably shifts your mindset to such a subtle degree that like over the course of a couple hundred books, like you just change as a person in the way you think.
Right.
So I think that even like same thing with like listening to podcasts or like being around people who are more educated than you or know something about something that you don't. I think that there's a certain amount of osmosis where you absorb some of that in either it's a mentality or perspective type of way. And so I think that there's still value to reading in that sense. But yeah, other than that, there's a pretty meticulous system to like trying to retain as much information as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I've not until recently had I ever done any form of recording what I was reading or like taking any kind of notes whatsoever. But just recently I started to take like the very, very biggest points and putting them all into one journal. Have you ever read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations? Mm-hmm. So it kind of ends up looking like that. Like it's just very potent quotes that I pick up from different places or maybe different things that I'm kind of pondering, and then I'll revisit that list because those are the things that have had like the biggest impact on me, and that's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that at least having the mentality of when you're reading, of like writing in the margins if you read physical books or just highlighting, I think also just makes you pay attention to what you're reading more. You know, it's like if you walk around a city, and I do this a lot when I'm traveling, and I have, let's say, in a new place, I like to have like a camera around, for example, because like the intention of taking a photo makes you pay attention to things in way closer detail. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with like, even if you have the intention of like have a pen in your hand when you're reading, you read things I think a little more closely. And like I think that if you have that, like I'm going to be absorbing this, I'm going to take notes. Mm-hmm. You read it in a different way than if you were just to kind of browse or skim through it.
That's a phenomenal point. I've never considered that. Because a lot of times I read for just pure leisure, mm-hmm. and I'll end up kind of just being in my head as I'm reading, and sometimes I can think about something entirely different while I'm reading and miss 8 pages.
Right.
So I'll end up rereading, and that's cool.
Yeah, so I think having that intention is like frames it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, I'm in the middle of writing a thesis paper on grit. And so it's all about grit related to achievement. And I wanted your take on the achievement versus like happiness and fulfillment kind of concept. it looks like you're really into meditation and living a holistic life, and you also run a huge company and you have a huge team. Where does achievement fall on your list of values and priorities in relation to like living a fulfilling life?
Yeah, so I think that these things get a little strange, or like the definitions change rapidly versus whoever you ask. And I think I've done a lot of soul searching or asking myself these questions over the last few years, especially with my life changing so much. And I think that to me, achievement and being fulfilled are kind of the same thing.
Okay.
And so what that means to me is like an intersection between like creativity output and learning something new. And so what that means for me is like always in my business is going to be something new to learn, whether that's from like great team members we bring on that are teaching me stuff, or like new things that we explore. Creativity means, doing a different type of marketing, or like making a new type of product, or like figuring out a new way to educate somebody. So like I think that as long as you're doing those things, for me anyways, I feel incredibly fulfilled. It's when I get to this point where like I keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, which I was kind of doing in my clinic, where you kind of fall off this cliff of, I think, self-perceived fulfillment. And for me, I've learned that like as long as I'm like being creative, and as long as I'm learning and doing both of those things, and usually at the same time, like I am good to go. And so I deprioritize achievement from a sense, like I know I said that I have this ridiculous spreadsheet with all these goals. I think that's different for me. Like I think achievement is just the continual pursuit of learning and creativity output. Of course, like I think like having goals helps you to do that and helps you to frame that. And so to make sure I do those things, that's why I have these goals. And so like, let's say we want to grow the company by X amount or whatever, or make these personal connections or whatever the case may be. I think that those are just the way I frame my goals are in all the areas of my life, like what allows me to like on a day-to-day basis, keep learning and keep being creative. And
Gotcha.
So like, that's how I push things forward. And that's how I look at things. Not necessarily like, oh, we did this thing. It's like, I think like materialistic achievements are fleeting, and like I've never celebrated them. Like this is kind of a running joke within our company, is like me and my co-founder, especially for Perfect Keto, like we don't celebrate really anything. Like I think to almost a detriment, because we just don't look at achievement that way. I don't think it's like because we're just like nose down and grinding so hard and all this type of stuff, like we don't appreciate things. It's just like for us, it's like an ongoing like leveling up all the time. And so
never arrived.
Right. And so it's never like, what's the point? It's like, if we hit this, well, then there's always gonna be something else. Like then you have this kind of hedonic adaptation where nothing's ever good enough. And I don't want to live that way.
Yeah.
Like I've gotten caught in that type of stuff in the past where like, being free of that is a much more satisfying life than like setting all these goals and living that way. Like I think like anything material I've achieved in my life, what I need. And so anything that's now on top is just like being able to continue to learn and to grow in that way, I think is the best way I could live my life.
I love that, man. Shit, I want to go in so many different directions right now. So yeah, it sounds like you classify it based on just how you're spending your time. And if you're spending it doing in activities that you love, then you are achieving and you are fulfilled.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On this spreadsheet, are you indexing things like other areas of life, such as relationships and community and stuff like that as well?
Yeah. So it pretty much breaks down everything. So there's a column, but like a section for everything in my life. So like a personal, mental, personal, physical, personal, financial, all companies and their relationships. And so there's certain triggers that like, they're not goals and it's like, I'm going to be happy when I meet this thing. It's like, if I meet this, I have done the work to be a better person,
yes,
type of thing, right? And so, for instance, just moved to Austin. Like one of the things was on there was like, and I did this in San Francisco when I first moved there too, is like 100 meaningful in-person connections.
Cool.
For the year,
mm-hmm.
right? So like that's a goal. And then so like I'll track who I meet with, what day, like what we chat about. And so like, that's not like a thing where like I do it and be like, yeah, fuck yeah, I got to 100. It's like, right. It's not that type of goal. You
right.
know what I mean?
It's like if you have 100 of those interactions, like you had a lot of good time.
Exactly.
You had a good year.
Yep.
That's cool.
And so same thing with like, I'm doing a lot of gymnastics work now, as it's been something that it's been tough for me to be really consistent with how much I've been traveling, just in life with everything. And gymnastics is something like to have positive adaptation to like progress skills. Like you just need to be consistent day in and day out. And so it's like, okay, 2-minute freestand handstand hold. Like that takes a very long time, but like that will force me to practice consistency in gymnastics training, things like that. And so I'm always thinking of like, where do I want to go and why? And so the 52 books thing is like, that's on there for reading as well. Meditate 325 times a year, right? Stuff like this where like, those are my goals, I guess, or achievements that I want for the year, but they're just basically a collection of all of the things that I know will make me feel fulfilled as a human and like help me grow. And like, so I think that business growth, the way I see it, is if I get complacent, the business will get complacent. It's like if I have really ridiculous goals for a business, like it will push me to adapt and to grow in the business. And like I think that's a good thing. And obviously help more people and like reach my goals in that sense, but not necessarily like, yeah, we hit the seller mark, or like it's just like it's something that I've kind of like lost as a driving factor, I think years ago. And so that's how I set up that sheet.
Very cool, man. Let's talk about nutrition a little bit. What is the one thing, or what's a big thing that comes to mind when that you see a lot of people doing in any population just out in the world that you're like, that is just dumb? Or what is one thing that you think people are really making a big mistake on in their nutrition?
I think that my lens on this is maybe a little biased because I'm in the keto space so much, but there's almost like this level of pride to make the most disgusting looking food on a ketogenic diet. Like people frying cheesesteaks in a deep fryer with like bacon and powdering it with almond meal and saying like, oh, it's keto approved, but it's just like disgusting food and like heaps of vegetable oil and just unhealthy stuff. And so like looking at things not from a holistic point of view, and just like it doesn't have to be that complicated for majority of people. Like I think that a lot of people need a lot of help to like we chatted before we started recording, like changing their behavior patterns and the way they think about things. But overthinking it maybe is the best way I can put it. Like eating like real food, or like just consistency, like we also talked about, into like approach and like lifestyle and intent is more important than I think like trying to gobble up every sort of piece of content and like, oh, I'm going to do it like this, and I'm going to intermittent fast and Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I'm going to eat this thing, and I'm going to have this supplement, and like coming up with like 3,000 things you need to do to be healthy, I think is like just completely overthinking it. And like the stress about trying to be healthy is probably driving a lot of people to be unhealthy.
Right.
And so I would say it's overthinking it.
Yeah, Ramit Sethi, he talks a lot about that in terms of finance, where people, they don't even take action because they're too busy debating minutia. And it's the same thing in nutrition. Like people are just stuck in their same poor nutrition habits while they debate like what's the absolute best combination of keto and supplements and or whatever their shtick is, you know. And when just taking small action and being consistent with it is going to make 80% of the difference anyway. Right.
And then less like you can download as much information in your brain as you want, but doing that in a general way, like you're never going to have the results that you want to get anyways. It's like you are an individual and you need to work with somebody one-on-one, or you need to like test things yourself and like get results on yourself and always get that feedback to be able to like figure out what works for you as far as a very detailed way anyways. It's like you can't have a detailed plan based upon general advice. And so people trying to get all these like little biohacks from everybody else, you have no idea how you're going to respond to that. Like everyone is so different on an individual basis. Like trying to do that without just like testing yourself and like how you respond to things is also, I think, it's just overthinking. So like, I mean, that's why I think like one-on-one coaching, like what you guys do is like so important, that it's not as simple as just like getting, you know, the latest biohacking plan that like has 50,000 different things you need to do to optimize your health. Like,
that you can do for one day.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, overthinking, I think is huge.
Got it. What's your, I think I can't remember where this question came from, but I think it came from your Instagram. Something about organ meats. What's up with organ meats? I don't know anything about them. Why are they good? Why should people know about them?
Yeah. So people just generally don't. People think that plants are the highest nutrient foods on the planet, and this is like a very misguided, like, way of thinking. Whereas if you put everything on a spectrum from top to bottom, but what's most nutrient dense per gram, organ meats are by far at the top of the list.
And what are they?
So like liver, heart, kidneys, more so in ruminants than other animals. Like, so for instance, if you eat chicken heart versus a beef heart, beef is going to be higher in nutrients.
Okay.
And there's reasons behind that we can get into, but top to bottom, organ meats way up top, then meat and animal products a little bit below that, and then far below that, herbs and spices, and then below that are like most vegetables people know of, and then below that, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and then grains and other things at the kind of the bottom of the period. So like if you're just optimizing from nutrient density, organ meats are just at the top of that spectrum. Not only to mention they are at that spectrum in the highest concentration, they're also in the forms that your body needs the most, because they are in animal form. And so, for instance, you get retinol from carrots. Well, people think like, oh, it's just the same thing as vitamin A. It's not the case. You have a conversion step that your body needs to go through to change most plant nutrients from a micronutrient perspective to usable nutrients in your body. And so doing that, you get maybe 4 to 8% of actual vitamin A from a carrot, versus from an animal product, you get 100% of it because it's already in the form that your body uses. And so getting things in animal forms and in organ meats, like you're going to get the highest density and highest usability rate of those nutrients. Mm-hmm. And so I think that when people eat lower down on that spectrum, they're having a hard time. They're like getting only a percentage of a lower amount of those nutrients. And so that's why I think that they're just underutilized.
Oh, it's fascinating. So, man, I know it's taken us a really long time to get to keto, but
no rush.
We're going on all kind of little great rabbit holes. Why is the plant-based movement so loud right now, and how does what you just said fit into that picture?
I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's valid. I think that all of us can agree that the way most meat is produced is awful. Like I wouldn't argue against that ever. And like I only buy meat here from a ranch up north that I found called Bar 3 Ranch. It like is the most humane operation ever. And like a fourth of a cow can last me for a very, very long period of time, even when I only eat animal products.
Do you go and like spend a couple of hours with the animals before you kill them?
I don't. So the next stage that I want to get to is so but I like go to the ranch and like see how they treat the animals and how everything's raised and all that type of stuff. I mean, I would like to do more hunting and fishing now that I'm in an area where I can actually do that. San Francisco is not really easy for that.
Right. Not many elk out there.
Right. But it's just like the way our population has grown, the way the food system has grown, I think there are a lot of valid arguments for a plant-based movement. I think that people are generally like they want to change the situation and they want to help, and I don't blame them for that. Like, I want to do the same thing too, but I think that supporting a more natural form of raising animals makes more sense than not. I mean, if you just look at statistics, like if it's a moral argument that the animal's going to die, like we're all going to die. Like if we can provide a really good life for an animal and kill it in a humane way and have it feed us so that we can be nourished and like be like really healthy creatures, then I think that that's an okay thing. Versus, let's say we're eating all these plants and we go through a monocrop field of wheat or barley and we kill like literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of animals with a tractor going through a field to get a couple bales of wheat. Like the actual amount of animals you're killing is a way higher degree. So like as far as a moral consideration, like I think that it's actually much less moral to eat more plants than not. But I think that there's a lot of arguments for like sustainability. Like I think a lot of it comes back to how we have the food system now. So like I think the best way to do that is to change the way the food system is and not like change how we're eating. And like it's easy to have the separation when you're at the grocery store of like, oh, this thing was just a plant and this thing was an animal, and like this is better for you. I mean, things look more vibrant and like there's a lot of stuff in that direction. But I mean, this is where I think like in most areas where you get extremism, you get the opposite bouncing back really, really hard and really quickly. I think that's why a lot of people are finding like a carnivore diet works really well. I was working with a lot of patients who were vegan or vegetarian for a long period of time who had significant health problems. I mean, if you look at the raw, like you will be sick if you're vegan unless you supplement things. Like if that's the case, like like you can't make the argument that it's the best diet for a healthy human being. You can make other arguments like it's more moral or more sustainable or for religious reasons. That's completely fine, but it's just factually not the best diet for a healthy human being. And for that reason, like I want to be as healthy as I can be. Like I want other people around me to be as healthy as I can be. So that's why I push that direction. And I think like we're starting to get a lot of bizarre things from this. So like now we have burger companies who are launching meatless burgers because people don't want to eat meat, right?
Damn.
It's like this Impossible Burger that like has like $100 million of funding behind it. It's putting like hydrogenated oils and like vegetable oils and like wheat proteins in it and like all this stuff that like we know is actually bad for people into this thing that's just replacing meat, which is actually good for people, which is insane.
Right.
And so like we're replacing things that we think are bad for us that are actually really good for us with things that are factually bad for us.
Yeah, that sounds like one of those things that in, I don't know, 10, 15 years, we're going to look back and say, holy shit, that was dumb.
Yeah, I mean, look at like this lab-grown meat thing is going to be impossible. Like if you just understand physics, like you can't buy into this. Like the way we get energy from an animal, how they consume energy, like it comes from the sun that goes to plants. The plants get the sun's energy and they grow up. And the cow, for instance, eats the grass, or an elk eating whatever in the woods, right? And then they accumulate that and all those nutrients. And then we eat that animal and then we accumulate a concentrated amount of nutrients. You can't do that in a lab.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have the chain of like literally the energy from the sun being concentrated several times over. Like you're just getting concentrated sun's energy when you're eating animal products. That's why like eating a plant-based diet, like the cow can convert these things into usable forms for us and they concentrate the energy. The plants concentrate the sun's energy. Like that's just how physics works as far as like energy transfer.
Right.
And so like, if you just understand that, like you just understand, like you cannot replicate that in a lab. You can't just like have a protein molecule split off into thousands of protein molecules. Like there's way more to nutrition than that. And so that's like, it's one of those things that drives me nuts. Like we're not thinking this through properly and we're not understanding like what are the effects of like real food and whole food nutrition on humans. Which is like, well, it's kind of like meat. It's kind of like a burger. It should be fine.
Right.
Like you said, I think like 10, 20 years
like
from now.
it, so
yeah,
it must be like
I think we're gonna face some serious crises. Like healthcare is already now like an existential threat to our country.
Mm-hmm.
And like I had Chris Krusser on my podcast a few weeks ago, and he was saying that, you know, one in two people either have diabetes or pre-diabetes, which costs $15,000 to manage per year. I mean, do the math on that. Like, what does that cost our healthcare system? Like,
right.
We don't have a bad healthcare system because we don't have like the right payer or whatever. It's because people are sick unnecessarily so, and that's too much of a burden. Like we have to pay for so much, and so eating non-real foods is going to drive that further.
Right. It's crazy. And yes, you heard him correctly. We are solar-powered beings.
That's right.
So I've not laid any of the groundwork for you here. This is the first time that I've really talked about a ketogenic diet in depth on this show. So pop our cherry. What is the ketogenic diet from a pretty high level?
Yeah, so it's just basically using fat as an energy source. So most people, when they eat any amount of reasonable carbohydrates over, say, like roughly 30 to 50 grams, they're going to use the breakdowns of carbohydrates for fuel source in their cells. If you restrict that, your body switches to using the breakdown of fat for fuel in the cells. It's pretty much all it is. That does not make it a healthy diet, in my opinion. So this is the confusion, like kind of what we talked about before a little bit, was people think that, okay, if I have now ketones floating around my blood, good to go, super healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case. So I think that having to, like getting those levels of ketones in your blood means you're running on a certain fuel, but it doesn't mean like you have a robust system. So that doesn't mean you're getting micronutrients. It doesn't mean that your hormones are working appropriately. There's all these things that I think people confuse a ketogenic diet with. It's not a one size fits all. I don't think it's right for every single person. And you get such a crazy swelling trend right now. And I think that it's really helpful for a lot of people. I think it can be super beneficial. However, applied as a broad stroke, like it's not just as simply like I have high ketone levels, therefore I'm healthy and like all my problems are good to go. And so I think like it's a lot to dig in here. So like I think you probably be best at like whatever your audience is at and what they need to know about it. I think it's like I've done it for maybe off and on for the last 5 or 6 years. I like the way I feel in it. I feel better cognitively. I think that's the biggest benefit for me, is that running all these businesses the way I am, like I need to be sharp as a tack from when I wake up to when I go to bed. And I can do that best on a ketogenic diet. Your brain prefers ketones to carbohydrates for a fuel source. And so it just requires less oxygen. The metabolism is a little bit differently.
Where does that statement come from? Because I've heard that a lot, and I don't know if I've ever read any research myself, but yeah, talk about that research a little bit, that our brain prefers ketones to carbohydrates.
Right. So you can just look at, they have what's called a tracer study. So they can put a different tracer on a ketone molecule versus a glucose molecule and see how much energy it takes for those things to be absorbed in your brain and which gets absorbed preferentially. And so like, let's say even if you take ketones supplementally and you're eating a high carbohydrate diet and you have both glucose or carbohydrates or ketones or fat breakdown in your bloodstream, your brain will primarily use ketones. The pathway that it's actually used in your brain isn't just research, it's just fact, like biological fact, that there's just different pathways. And so to get glucose across your blood-brain barrier, it's much more difficult than getting ketones. And just the process, like you don't need as much oxygen to put the ketone through an ATP generating flow as you do with glucose. Glucose has a lot more byproducts to it, which can be good for certain reasons. However, it's not great in the brain. Like if you want the best output of your brain. For instance, if you want like explosive output in your muscles, fantastic. You want glucose in there, you want to be eating carbohydrates. But I don't think there can be an argument that like if you want the best brain output, and like that's your number one priority, which it is for me, that eating carbohydrates is better. And so that's just a biological pathway. And then also just, I mean, we see through, like I said, the tracer studies that the brain and the heart and a few other tissues take up ketones more readily than glucose, even when they're both in the bloodstream at the same concentrations.
Got it. So some of the biggest benefits that experts claim of ketosis is fat loss, brain function, reduced risk of cancer and neurological disease. So I have a couple questions off of that general concept. So first is in fat loss, what diets has this been compared to, and are the calories controlled? Can you talk about that research a little bit?
Yeah, so there have been a lot. So there's a few different things here that people need to realize with research, and it's really tough to look at this from like a high level view, because any type of a meta-analysis or any research that looks at all this stuff broad strokes generally doesn't control for an actual level of ketosis. And so there's not a crazy amount of studies that have just ketosis in the actual methods. And so why I say this is because people think that just general low carb equals ketogenic diet. And I think that there's some confusion on like when an energy state switches over. I think that you can readily say that you're in a state of quote unquote ketosis when you're roughly over like 0.5 when measured on a blood meter, which is just how many ketones are floating around your bloodstream. What happens is you get a lot of studies that come out that say like, okay, this low carb diet, and then people conflate that and they say, oh, and they reference even in the study that it's a ketogenic diet, but no testing was done and it was just a general low carb diet. Well, the problem with that is that if people are just eating low carb, but not low carb enough, or not like they haven't ramped their fat up enough, or they haven't had a longer time of adaptation to actually use the ketones, that you're kind of in between energy systems. And so your body literally doesn't have the cellular machinery to bring ketones in the cell, because if you've never used ketones throughout your whole life, like most people haven't after they were a baby and feeding on breast milk, what happens is that like your cells change over the structure. And so to effectively be burning fat for fuel can take people 6, 8, 12 weeks to do so effectively. And so if you take somebody who has been eating carbohydrates their whole life and even put them on a moderately low carbohydrate diet, they don't even have the cellular machinery to be in a state of ketosis. Mm-hmm. So even in that instance, even if you do test for ketone levels, it does not mean that the person, like that's just in their blood. It doesn't mean that they're running on them at a cellular level. And so then you get people who are still in between. Their cells are asking for energy. They can't really get it into their cell. And you're not eating carbohydrates, and so you're not getting that either. And so you're kind of stuck in this no man's land where you're not getting energy source from carbohydrate, and you're not really effectively getting it in the cell from a ketone body either. And so like that's really, really bad. And so there haven't been like a crazy, it's like when we look at like, okay, when compared to these other studies, like we're very rarely looking at ketogenic diet, but when we do, they are controlled isocalorically, and even beyond that, they've seen studies, I think the last one I read was 400 calories more on a ketogenic diet, lost more weight than a high carb diet at the same amount of calories. So
lost more weight or more fat?
Lost more fat, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can send that to you to put in the show notes too.
Yeah.
There's been more coming out now where you actually can eat more calories on a ketogenic diet, like a true ketogenic diet, and lose more fat mass than on a controlled, and compared against like a bunch of, I think there was like 4 different types of diets on there. So there was it's a high carb, high fat, which is always the worst. So I would never recommend that to anybody. Like high carb, high fat is just,
that's the standard American diet.
Yeah,
right there. Very low protein.
You cause tons and tons of problems on that. It's like in all the research that I've seen, also looking at this stuff, that's always the worst. Like for sure. Mm-hmm. So I would never, like, I even go as far as to, like, people when they're trying to have cheat meals or whatever, like have carbs in their diet, like especially with saturated fat, I think having processed carbs and saturated fat together is like a complete beast that you want to stay away from. And like we could dig into the science of that if you wanted to, but that's the worst. Then high carb, low fat, and then high fat, low carb, and then kind of like a moderate, like standard, like split between all of them, all the macronutrients. And with all of these, it's showing that the ketogenic diet, you get more fat loss even at a higher calorie consumption rate. And there's, I mean, I don't think we know exactly if it's
what
like,
the mechanism is.
Yeah, like is it a thermogenic effect? Are we getting, like, is it a temporary thing for people who have more fat mass? Because, I mean, is it a hormonal regulation? We're not certain on this exactly. And is it the same for people who are 300 pounds overweight or somebody who's just 10 pounds overweight? You know what I mean? It's like, where does this level off? There hasn't been a lot of long-term studies on this, like fat loss especially. However, like when you actually look at a keto, like a true ketogenic diet, and not the, you know, low carb versus, I think that low carb, I mean, Atkins and stuff like that, people kind of lump it all into one thing, and I don't think that's very, very true.
Right. They look at like the food people are eating and they call it a ketogenic diet, but they're not actually testing them to see if they're in ketosis.
Right. Or even using the ketones as a fuel source. And so like even that, I think it's really, really lost and confused. Like I mentioned before, like, okay, it's in your bloodstream, but are you using the ketones in your cells? And like that's really hard to determine for people. And I think that's mostly subjective. Like we don't really have a great way to test, like, okay, they're in my bloodstream, but are they going into my cells now without doing a cellular biopsy? And so that's where like we need to be like, okay, this person's been on this low carb ketogenic diet. They've been at a certain level of ketones for a long period of time, and they feel subjectively great, high energy levels. I think we can say like, okay, they're probably using that as fuel. So like that makes it really difficult to do really good research.
Right.
I mean, there has been a lot of, especially now over the last 3, 4, 5 years, really good stuff coming out. And like I have a Google alert for every time there's new studies coming out on a ketogenic diet, and it's popping up more and more and more like by the day, which is great. Like I think that I just want the best answers. And so like if it turns out where it's not great long term, awesome, we learned. And like that's what I want to know. But it's just like doing the right science in the right way, I think, is imperative.
What's the research say about keto related to longevity, like reducing risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, stuff like that?
So I don't think that we have any. So I don't like promising longevity to humans based upon non-human studies when it comes to anything. So like people say that, okay, I say like hypocaloric diet or eating less calories is really extending the life of worms this long or whatever. Like, okay, well, we can't really test that in humans, same thing. So when you look at a disease level, so a ketogenic diet has been shown in the same mechanism. I think that it turns out on the same pathways as fasting does. And so I think that when you look at some of these same things, like people can get some of the benefits from a pathway perspective and genes that are turned on and off by doing a ketogenic diet without fasting.
Talk about just name a few of the biggest.
What's that?
The biggest benefits of fasting and keto.
So
in relation to this.
Yeah, I just think that a lot of research shows that they are similarly help with longevity in non-animal subjects. And so when you look at worms and their lifestyle, they have different signaling molecules that get activated in the same way. And so when that happens similarly in a ketogenic diet and in a fasting diet, we say, okay, the ketogenic pathway, and like especially beta hydroxybutyrate, which is one of the ketone bodies, activates certain signaling pathways in the body that trigger the same responses and cascades that fasting does. And so while we can say like, okay, well worms and things like this can live longer, it's hard for me to say like that's definitively what happens in a human. However, the original question was what again?
Like just kind of a broad explanation about what the research is saying.
When you look at, okay, why is it claimed that it's so helpful in a lot of these different pathways for disease states? It's like, I think that if you reduce certain diseases, then you can claim, okay, It's probably good from a longevity standpoint by the addition of subtraction, more so than it being like it makes you live longer. For instance, if you take away cancer, if you take away heart disease, like people will live longer, have better lives. So I think from that standpoint, we can say that's the case. So for some of these disease states, I think that we have a bunch of different things going on. Mainly, ketogenic diet is very anti-inflammatory, and so there's a lot of different ways where it is anti-inflammatory. And so a lot of modern diseases are from inflammation and chronic inflammation on a cellular level.
And is that compared to like a standard American diet, like a high carb, high fat diet, or
this is twofold. I think that we get a lot of that response from people taking out a lot of the crap that they're eating. So like if somebody eats bagels and donuts and stuff like that, and then goes on a ketogenic diet and doesn't eat that stuff, great. I think they're going to have a huge response. But then also the same type of signaling molecules that independently ketones offer. And so, for instance, like beta hydroxybutyrate works on what's called like HDAC inhibitor. So this, like, you don't get that from anything other than ketones, which that like helps DNA from not being damaged, for example. And so like there are independent pathways of a ketogenic diet. The question is like how much of this stuff is dependent on just replacing, like taking out things that you're eating, and how much of it is involved with the ketones themselves. I think we're starting to unravel and uncover a lot of these different pathways that we're like, okay, wow, this works for this reason. And I think that we have enough evidence to like say definitively like, okay, it independently of food choice, like having ketones in your bloodstream does help lower inflammation.
Like taking a keto supplement.
Right. And so that's why like, and then, yeah, so like those same pathways are activated by having like a ketone supplement, even if you're not in a full ketogenic state. But then cancer is a whole other thing. But like essentially we talked about before, you need less oxygen, and the ketones are metabolized in a slightly different way than the glucose is in your cells. That's it. The glucose just has a lot more byproducts, right? And so kind of like if you were buying just from a farmer's market in your house, right, and you just brought stuff in, vegetables in that were fresh, you would have relatively no trash, right? If you're buying all the stuff that was packaged, you start accumulating all this trash, but didn't take the garbage out ever, then you had a problem, right? And so that's what most people's cells are like, where they have glucose come in, which comes with a lot of byproducts or trash, and they're never really doing things like fasting. They're not really taking care of themselves, and so they don't clear all that stuff out, and so they accumulate a lot of information over a long period of time. Now, is this like those cellular clearance mechanisms? Like if people do fasting, if they do, take care of themselves, if they have low stress, if they're getting a lot of sleep, if they're eating the right things, like is it net? We don't know, but what we do know is that independently, ketones and ketosis offers some level of inflammation reduction that I think is beneficial for some disease states. And I think that like looking at cancer as well, like that's a whole other thing to dive into. There's a book called Tripping Over the Truth by Travis Christofferson. It's phenomenal. It kind of breaks down like all like why we think about cancer as we do, and the fact that like it's a metabolic disease from a mitochondrial dysfunctional standpoint, which ketones basically bypass that and don't feed cancer cells. Like cancer cells are eating glucose and the breakdowns of sugar, but the question is like, okay, do they get to that point with ketones or not? Like are we basically, if we're on a ketogenic diet, are we starving cancer cells enough so they can't even grow to a certain point? Like it's almost going to be point, in my opinion, that ketosis is going to be a standard of care for cancer treatment within the next like 10 to 15 years, or at least I'd hope so, because of the research that's coming out about cancer treatment. Dr. Thomas Seyfried is someone you can look into with that. He has something called a glucose ketone index, saying that like if your ketones are above 1.0 compared to glucose and a level that's kind of standardized. So basically, if you're interested in this, you take your glucose measurement and divide it by 18 and compare that to where your ketone levels are in millimolar. And his subjects, or in his papers that he's done, like over 1.0 have like a tremendous like 20, 30, 40 times reduction rate in cancers from having that high level of ketones. So
interesting.
This is where like we need to do more research and like really, really start using this as a therapeutic tool as it may be used. Like again, do I think it's necessary for everybody? Probably not. But like if you're somebody who like should be hedging away from inflammation and have a higher risk of some of these diseases, I think that it could be a really, really good tool and something that's worth looking into.
Gotcha. Can it, I've seen in some places people stating that it can lower testosterone. Is there any merit to that?
I would actually have only seen the opposite.
Really?
So sex hormones are derived of cholesterol and saturated fat, essentially. And so people who eat higher fat diets generally have a marked increase in sex hormones. And so this, I've never seen that clinically, and I've done a lot of blood work on people who have done a ketogenic diet, like hundreds of people, and I've only seen positive correlation with like increase in testosterone in normalization of sex hormones specifically from a high fat ketogenic diet. So I would have no idea where that's coming from.
Gotcha.
If I had a pathway or like an argument towards that, like again, I only want to know the truth.
Right.
So like from what I've seen and like pathways I understand, I would say that it would be the opposite of anything.
Gotcha. One thing we were talking about before is this nutrition pyramid with consistency kind of being the base. And we were just talking about the importance of being consistent on a diet. So talking about ketosis in terms of fat loss, I could see a strong argument. Well, first off, if the research is showing that even eating 400 more calories, you lose more fat than on other diets, that's a really strong argument for ketosis. But what we were talking about is, well, in those studies, like that's a controlled environment. Mm-hmm. I think that ketosis is a much harder diet to stick to in our society. When you look at social events and restaurants, there are just fewer options and more challenges. Given all of that, do you think it's a good, or given that, who do you think it's a good option for in terms of fat loss?
Yeah, so I think you make a really good point that it can be difficult. I think that a lot of the difficulty lends itself to like, it is very complicated. Like, is it this many carbs or that many carbs? Is this much protein or that much protein? Like, what types of fat can I eat? Like, it's a really, really complicated thing, actually. Like, it seems so easy, but in an individual level, it's kind of like you need a lot of tweaking. And a lot of people like have a hard time understanding that in the beginning. So like, I think that's one of the compliance issues is not necessarily an availability standpoint, as like I have no problem doing it. So like from like I think it can be more challenging if you're changing your lifestyle 100% from like making those decisions. However, I think one of the biggest challenges on consistency is just the overwhelm of information and the contradiction of information. It's like right now we have so many people saying so many definitive things. No, it has to be over 25 grams of carbs or under. Or it has to be under 50, but only every other week or whatever, you know what I mean? And so I think that confusion is actually a big part of the consistency. I think that food choice can be challenging, but I think that a lot of it stems to, you know, our food system is tough, but if you rely on convenience, it's going to be much harder. Like, so if you prepare ahead of time, I don't ever have any issue myself when doing that. It takes a little bit more work for sure. But again, like the amount of benefit that I receive from being cognitively sharp all day long versus like being sluggish if I just eat a sandwich or something else, like it is worth it to me to prepare more ahead of time. Like, I don't think it's unachievable. And like the availability of like products and like making it more convenient is something that we're trying to solve with our company as well, and like making it be effortless for people. So like, and this is something that I'm always surveying like all of our customers is like, okay, how are you having a hard time with this, and like where are the biggest things that we can impact as a company so we can make it easier for more people. Right. I think that it's more pressing for people who have disease states that they need to treat. So I think like first group of people are like anyone who has like, for instance, type 2 diabetes, like I talked about before, how like 1 in 2 people have this. It's costing our country hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, like over the course of the next however many years. Those people can benefit. Like we've seen, like a company called Virta is doing research and trials on this, like on a continuous basis of using a ketogenic diet to reverse type 2 diabetes. Nothing else, no drug has shown to do this, like only using a ketogenic diet. And so like someone like that, I think has an urgency to like do it for clinical reasons. I think somebody just losing fat, I mean, if you have no problem like preparing a lot and being somewhat extreme when compared to your probable previous lifestyle, and you're kind of like, you want to test out yourself a lot, could probably benefit from it. I think somebody who has to make a lot of changes and overwhelmed with that at first is probably not the best thing to jump into. And so I think that when you're looking at personality styles, there's obviously a huge spectrum, and the people who are more apt to like treat themselves as a science experiment to jump in, I think we would have the most success. And the people who are more, I think, motivated by clinical reasons and like fixing health problems, it's great for, my sister got diagnosed with Lyme disease. It's again another mitochondrial problem. So the energy producing organelles in your body are dysfunctional from a Lyme disease. And so she was having all this crazy stuff. Nothing was helping. She was taking all these drugs. She was like losing her vision, getting numbness and tingling everywhere. And the only thing that helped her was when I got her on a ketogenic diet. And so stuff like people like that, I think like it doesn't like people can be consistent when they can see again. For example,
Right.
like
when the motivation is there,
when she can play with her kids, right? And so when it's like, there's many different ways I think people can lose fat. And so I think that when you're looking at available tools as well, when a ketogenic diet is one of the only tools available, I think that that's where people can use it really, really well and like be consistent with it. But like you guys obviously have a lot of experience. Like you can very clearly say like you don't need to use a ketogenic diet to lose fat. Like, can it be helpful in that regard? Yeah, of course. Can it be hard to stick to for some people? Of course. And so like if people are better to stick on a diet that's higher in carbohydrates and not in ketosis, and their main goal is fat loss, like they don't need to do a ketogenic diet. Can they do that effortlessly in some cases? Yeah, of course also. But I think that it is getting easier. I think that is because it's so new as well. It's also very challenging. So like there's not a lot of information. There's not a lot of products. You can't really go to a store. I mean, apparently Starbucks is working on like an MCT product.
Nice.
So,
nice.
I mean, when stuff like that starts rolling
with Dave
out,
Asprey, who you want to fuck.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully. Cross my fingers on that one. So like I think that as it becomes more mainstream, there'll be more consumer demand and the market will change a little bit and people will be able to go into a convenience store and grab, some product that's keto friendly, or just knowing like really what there is. Like I can go to a gas station and buy nuts and beef jerky and water and be fine.
Right.
And so like there's always, or I can just fast too. Like I usually do that when I travel because there's usually not any alternatives, so I just fast. And so I think that I think it's easy if you know what you're doing and you're motivated appropriately. So,
Got it.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough. Who knows?
That's a great answer, and it's really refreshing to hear someone like you own a ketosis company or like that's what y'all do.
Yeah.
With a with that perspective, usually people in that are big proponents of ketosis are very polarizing, and they talk in terms of like this is the only way you can do something, and nothing is the only way you can do anything, right? We know that for sure. There's so many ways you can lose fat, you can live long, you can et cetera, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's one aspect of the big picture. Like, are you sleeping? Like, I almost rather have people before worrying about ketosis like sleep 8 hours a night consistently.
Right.
Like, do that. Move
Right.
well. Don't be stressed. Like, if you don't have those things and you're trying to like worry about what level your ketones are at, you're missing the boat. Like, and then one of the first things I said when we started talking was like, I don't think it's for everyone. Like, I don't like not even close. I think it's helpful for sure, and we're trying to make it easier and help educate people about it to see if it is right for them. But like, in no way like am I saying like this is the perfect thing. Like, you need to use all my products or else like you can't achieve any goals. Like, it's just absurd.
So going along the same lines, how would you? This is just like a thought experiment. And it could be ketosis, it could be any diet. At what point do you, let's say you have like a close friend or family member who is trying a diet, at where do you help them draw the line between like it's causing them stress, like added stress and social anxiety and like a bunch of side effects trying to stick to this diet? Where do you draw the line for them?
Yeah, I think the first question I always ask people is like, what is your goal? And like, that will always help me. Like, okay, they're motivated by X, Y, or Z, right? And like that will help me place them in a certain bucket to like see that they're going to be going down a certain path. I think that once people start, I think, becoming like overwhelmed to a point where they're not making any decisions and not moving forward at all, is when like bringing it back and just be like, okay, well, just again framing it back to their goal. So like that's just dependent on like where you'd switch someone, in my opinion. But doing what you can. So like I think for a lot of people, just reducing the amount of carbohydrates from 500 a day to 150 a day would be beneficial, especially if they're not an athlete. Like if somebody is just like a 40-year-old woman who like walks a couple miles a day and that's all the activity she gets, like I don't think she should be eating that many carbs. I don't think she necessarily needs to be in ketosis, but like even getting somebody approximating towards that direction, which we know is going to be better for them, is like something that I think if they're getting stressed out is a good step to make. So it's just all about finding goals and like where people need to be.
Yeah. So one of the things that you touched on earlier was that one of the big problems is information overload. So if someone is listening to this and they want to try it out, what do you want to tell them to help them navigate the interwebs and like help them prevent information overload.
Yeah, you can't take general advice for a personalized diet. So find whatever macro calculator you want, find whatever recipes you want, find whatever information you want, but then there's a point where you got to dive in and test yourself as an individual. With this type of stuff, a ketogenic diet and the way you produce and use ketones is so individual, more than any other type of eating, in my opinion. Like, anybody can eat like a quote unquote paleo diet, right? Cool, whatever you're eating, like meat and vegetables. When it comes to a ketogenic diet, the way your cells work and the way they produce and use ketones as fuel is completely different from somebody else. It's like you can't go to a website and see like, okay, this is the general guideline, I'm going to do it this exact way, and why isn't it working? And like getting frustrated. Like, you need to do it and then troubleshoot a little bit and figure out in yourself, and like have the understanding that it will be a little bit of a learning curve before you figure out what works specifically for you. I think that's the biggest problem that we run into, is people try to take very general advice and apply that to themselves. Like, in most cases it works, but not for a ketogenic diet, in my opinion. Especially like getting into it. Like, now I know exactly how I respond to it, and so I can go out and like have no problems. So, like, it took me a while to figure out. Like, I was 6 months probably before I like realized I wasn't actually using ketones for fuel. I felt like shit. I was like, my energy was low, my hormones were getting trashed, I wasn't recovering, I wasn't sleeping. And this was that gray zone that I was in. Like, I wasn't testing my ketone levels at that time. I was like, oh, I'm restricting carbs, it should be fine. And that's how most people get into it. They're like, well, if I eat, and then they track on an app, like, well, is it net carbs or total carbs? And 47 or 50, 51, now I failed. Like, it's not a success or failure like that. It's like, how do you feel? And like, what is your goal? And like, trying to approximate towards that, and using this as a tool and realizing that it's a very individual endeavor, and that investing in figuring out what works for you over the course of like 3, 4, or 5 weeks is like, will pay off the rest of your life. If you figure out that it doesn't work for you, great. That's one less option that you took off the table. If you figure out that it does work for you, and it's a strategy you can use for the next 50, 60, 70 years, it's a pretty powerful thing. Like, it's a really good investment of time, in my opinion, to be able to do that work and figure out, like, okay. And like, for myself, like, I know, like, if I want to perform physically, terrible diet. Like, I would fuel a completely different way, which I had figured out in the past. Like, if I want to gain muscle mass, terrible diet. Like, I think that I have a different strategy for that. Like, but like, now I have a toolbox where, like, if I have certain goals that may or may not change, like, let's say next year I want to put on muscle mass, it's going to be a completely different thing. I'm not going to be eating a ketogenic diet, but like, I have a recipe book in my head, not necessarily recipes, but like the strategy of like how I would do that, because I've done the work of figuring that out in the past. And so like, I think just having the tool in the toolbox of like, okay, I want to have really sharp mental focus for the next 3 weeks. Okay, ketogenic diet, I know what that means for me. It means eating these foods and having this feeling or whatever. So like, developing that at an individual level, I think, is the most important thing. Like, knowing that when you're getting into it. That it's not as simple as like limiting carbs and eating whatever else.
Yeah, that's a cool perspective, like having it as a tool in your toolbox to use for specific periods of time. Like, for instance, if you want to focus, or if you find yourself in some kind of disease state or at risk, it might be a phenomenal option.
Yeah, and like, I have a very high incidence of cancer in my family. And so like, that's another thing. Like, I don't mind eating that way. I feel great. My mood is great. My cognition's great. Like, there's no downside to me being on it. And I think that if it's a downside to you, then of course don't do it. Like, if you're missing out on social events, like you're not participating or don't feel like you're included in things because of it, like, I think that going to a completely different approach is entirely warranted at that point.
Right. What are the best resources, in your opinion, for someone just getting into it?
Yeah, well, we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars putting resources on our website. So we have hundreds and hundreds of articles. I mean, so perfectketo.com.
Do you have a crash course on it?
So we're working on that, actually.
Cool.
It's just like, everyone learns so differently. Like, we've tested these things, and we'll get a group of 100 people and like go through the same thing, and like,
they have different questions.
Yeah, it's a really complicated thing that we're working on. But I mean, we have a lot of get started posts with all this like as much information as you could possibly digest. Right. Or wherever else. Like I said, like I think that we have the best information. I think pretty biased on that. However, I think that you can get the same place. Let's say you read someone else's work or did some other research, completely fine. Just get started, I think, is the biggest thing for most people. Like, don't let the information overload hold you back. So read something else, but like, don't read 50 different sources and then like grovel over the inconsistencies. Like, oh, they said 40 grams and this person said 50 grams of carbs. Which is it? Like, it doesn't matter. Just get started and try it out, I think, is the number one advice.
Other than the information overload, what are a few of the biggest mistakes people make when starting out?
I think eating too little. I think people generally like they want to lose weight with it, and so it's kind of multi-pronged here. So people want to lose weight with it, so they think they need to eat 500 calories a day, or they're not used to eating fat in the same way, and so they take away carbohydrates and don't replace it with anything else. And so I think that under eating is probably the biggest thing.
Got it.
I think impatience is number 2. And so like I said, like you literally have different transporters in your cells that like need to be upregulated for you to start using fat as fuel. So like it may take, especially if you've never used, like if you haven't been athletic and your body doesn't have kind of a metabolic flexibility, it might take a while. So like just being patient with it is sometimes tough for people to like not get results immediately, is another one. And I think food quality is another mistake that people make. Like, I think that you make a good point earlier with saying like consistency matters a lot. But I think that when you take away carbohydrates, but then if you just load up vegetable oils, like it's not a really good trade.
Yeah,
and like
trading one problem for the other.
And so like that's another one too. And like I said earlier, like I think it's almost like a point of pride for people in a ketogenic diet to like eat trash. And so like buying to that side of the community is a little sad, but yeah, I mean, there's tons of pitfalls people can run into. Not testing initially if you're in ketosis or not. Like I said, like that's the first problem that I ran into. Like 6 months of feeling like shit.
Right.
And so I think that I don't think testing is necessary after after you figure out what works for you. Throw away your meter, throw away your strips. You don't need it anymore unless you're curious. Like I rarely test myself anymore, but I think that when you're trying to figure out like, you know, can I have a chicken breast or a steak or this with fat or that? Like, does that affect me or not? Like, these things are all very, very individual, depending on like if it was after a workout or before a workout or in the morning or in the night time. It's like there's a lot of stuff to figure out. I think it's fun. That's why I do it.
Right.
But testing in the beginning to see like, okay, how does this affect my physiology, and what's the best approach for me? I think is critical. Again, you're looking at like, sure, it's $1 or $2 a strip to test, but like $50, $100, $200, and you have a lifelong tool that you can use that can be like, literally save your health. And so I think it's worth it from whatever input that you're looking at.
It's awesome. I got a few wrap-up questions for you, and then we'll get out of here. What book have you given most as a gift or recommended?
That changes all the time. That's a question that comes up. But I think I gave, I actually saw it over here, Deep Work, to all my employees last year, and then at the beginning of this year I gave everyone Principles by Ray Dalio.
Nice.
Deep Work is something that like is super, like it's so important. Like I don't think the book is like spectacular for any reason. I just think the concept that most people have lost over a very long period of time is like distraction-free work and like thinking about things on a deep level is such a missed opportunity in our society with these gadgets and social media and everything that like always vying for our attention, that we just like we're skipping on the surface of like an ocean.
Yeah.
And we never dive to the deep end. It's crazy. And like that's where all the magic happens. That's where like I said before, like learning and creativity, that's where that happens. That's where like progress happens. That's where fulfillment is. That's where happiness is. And everybody's up top. And so I think like just the concept of that and like drilling that into someone's head over the course of a book, like I said, you don't really need to take away his system about doing it, but just the concept of like after reading the book, like, oh shit, that's right. I should probably.
It is a game changer if you're open to it.
Yeah, it's like I do that religiously every day. Like I don't check email, social media, anything, and usually until like 11:30 noon.
Nice. Same here.
And we do that for the whole company. We say like nobody should respond to the email, nobody should be on Slack. Do not be talking to each other. Like that's your time where you go deep. Like do your morning routine, do whatever you do, and then dive in deep and like focus on something, learn something, like whatever it is, but like just focus for that amount of time.
I love that. How did you get adoption of that concept throughout the company? Did you have everyone read it, or did you just teach about it? How did that happen?
Yeah. So like, as we've like been adding people onto the staff and stuff too, it's just been kind of like one of the core values that we've had is like deep focused attention and work. And I think like having clear communication and systems around that, and not having it be so chaotic and expecting that everybody like be available at every moment in time, I think is a way to like hedge against that. But yeah, the people that we're usually attracting are people who are very interested in what we're doing, and so like they want to help and grow themselves. And like we only hire people who are into that type of stuff anyway. So it's like it's not really hard to convince someone like, okay, this makes sense. This is a better way to be.
Yeah. That book is for sure one of the best I've read in the last year, and I finally deleted all social media apps from my phone. And it is one of the most impactful things I've done in so long.
Notifications, like I only have texts and calls on my phone, and I'm thinking about shutting text off completely. Game changer, 100%.
Yep. Yeah, I wish flip phones could have like Lyft app and stuff like that. We'll go back to that.
So I've actually been using an Apple Watch for that type of stuff because like you can't really do anything on it.
Yeah.
But you can do enough.
Okay.
So like I use it and then I put my phone in my backpack, and then like I can order an Uber on it.
Yeah.
Right. Or I can like anything that I like would be critical like that I can do, but like I can't browse Instagram. I can't look at Safari. I can't do anything. I can't read. I just got to be off of it entirely.
Cool.
So it's actually been like a piece of technology that's helped me use less technology.
Yeah,
like
that's cool. Because I thought about it the complete opposite way. I thought about it as keeping you more plugged in, but that's a different way to look at it. Yeah, that's great.
So like whenever I want to get off my phone, so I use it two places. At the gym, I wear a polar heart rate strap, and like I can get my heart rate immediately on my wrist, which is great. So I do a lot of training based upon that. And then while I'm like, if I'm not like at my zone on my computer at home, or like wherever I'm at my office, maybe like completely like set up my environment, like I'm in transit, like working at coffee shops or whatever, then I wear it to like get myself off my phone.
Got it. Love it. What's a belief that you hold that if others held would have the biggest impact on their life and or performance?
Yeah, eat real food. Eating real food, I think, is the biggest thing.
Hell yeah. What's an action you think people should take immediately?
Cut out anything that's like egregiously packaged in like bright crazy stuff. So like it's there's always this thing where people like, oh, but like if I just have this one thing, like people don't understand that. And this is something when I first learned, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. But like your cell wall is made of fat, right? And if you eat a bad fat, like a vegetable oil, for example, a polyunsaturated fatty oil, it stays in your cell membrane for up to 2 years. 2 years. And so if you have a quote unquote cheat meal, or like you just eat whatever, like you have to live with that meal for 2 years. Like right. I understand like having this like moderating with stress, but like people should think about that. Like your body builds things in your body. Like you use things you eat to build part of you. And so like if I used a awful brick to build your siding, it's not just going to evaporate and like it's not made of anything. Like you are made of what you eat, and like you don't turn over every day. Mm-hmm. Like it's like 7 months to 2 years is like where your cells turn over. It's like you're living with those meals for that long. So it's
so be more conscious of what you eat. God damn. Love it. Man, this was such a refreshing conversation. You were the first person, maybe ever, that makes me want to go dive into some keto research and
try it out, man,
and check it out, man. I really love what you're up to, and I think someone like you or you are going to, make this more widely available, obviously, but teach people that wouldn't otherwise be open to learning about it. So I really love what you're up to. Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, so my personal Instagram is where I'm most active. If people want to get in touch at all, so that's just Dr. Anthony Gustin, and then also
and you've got like a professional photography type of account. It's like super high quality photos.
Only the good stuff.
Check it out, guys.
Yeah. And then same personal website, same name, and then perfectketo.com, and then same thing on social media for that company.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
Appreciate it, man.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW.